Let me tell you about Brooke. She wasn't malicious. She was just chronically, beautifully unaware. She possessed that rare, magnetic quality of the main character energy that the rest of the world, especially my mother, seemed to validate constantly. Her businesses weren't enterprises. They were elaborate, high-maintenance hobbies that somehow always resulted in me doing the tedious administrative work, while I was neck-deep in regulatory paperwork and clinical trial logistics. Brooke was selling these things she called empowerment pouches, small zippered bags with generic, misspelled motivational quotes silk-screened onto cheap canvas. You can imagine the profit margins, or lack thereof. But every time she posted a new design on Instagram, Mom would call every relative, aunts, uncles, third cousins twice removed, to announce, "Brooke is crushing it. She just sold 5 pouches this morning." Meanwhile, I had just secured a $2 million federal grant renewal for the lab, and my accomplishment was met with, "Oh, that's right, you're still doing that research thing, aren't you?" delivered with the same tone one might use to acknowledge a dental appointment. The comparison was exhausting. Brooke's chaos was celebrated as passion and artistry. My meticulous organization and professional success were seen as simply what Clara does, like breathing or doing the dishes. It was a narrative Mom had perfected. Brooke was the delicate flower who needed constant nurturing and financial buffering. I was the sturdy oak who could withstand any storm and, more importantly, could provide shade and resources for everyone else. One Saturday, Brooke needed an all-hands-on-deck team for a local craft fair. This was, of course, the Saturday I had planned to spend studying for a critical professional certification exam. Mom cornered me by the refrigerator. "Clara, this is huge for Brooke's momentum. She needs you to handle the cash and inventory. She gets easily overwhelmed by numbers." "Mom, the exam is next week. This is an all-day thing and I'm behind." I tried to inject just a touch of professional sternness into my voice, but it always sounded like a whimper against Mom's practiced emotional pressure. "Oh, honey, you're so smart, you'll be fine. Brooke's success benefits all of us," she insisted, the lie so smooth it was almost convincing. "Besides, Leo is having a meltdown about his school project, and he only listens to you. You can talk him through it at the table while you sort the cash. Multitasking, right?" I ended up spending 8 hours at a folding table, managing a chaotic ledger of tacky totes and trying to explain the solar system to a 7-year-old who was sticky with melted cotton candy. I didn't get a thank you from Brooke. I got an order. "Can you drop these returns off the post office on Monday?" I sleep in on Mondays because of my early morning creative session. I skipped the certification exam that week, which cost me the non-refundable registration fee. That was the moment I realized the family's needs were not just inconveniencing my life. They were actively costing me my future. I started applying for jobs in Raleigh with a vengeance. I didn't care about the commute, the logistics, or the upheaval. I cared about the distance, the emotional, physical, and psychological distance I desperately needed. I felt like a plant that had outgrown its pot, its roots choking on the cramped, nutrient-depleted soil of Dayton. I needed sun and space to actually bloom. The application process was clandestine. I took calls in my car in the parking lot of a distant grocery store. I crafted custom cover letters at 2 a.m. When the final interview for the senior clinical specialist position at Apex Bio came through, my heart hammered like a drum solo. It was everything I wanted: a significant step up, a team focused on innovation, and a relocation package with a generous signing bonus. When the offer finally landed in my inbox, a beautiful, crisp PDF detailing a 6-figure salary, a hefty bonus, and full relocation support, I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a cold, clinical sense of validation. The world saw my worth, even if the 3 people living down the hall didn't. This document wasn't just a contract. It was my passport. It was the key to my own liberation, and the cost of this freedom, I knew, would be the final necessary severance of my role as the family's invisible caretaker. The next step was telling them, or more accurately informing them, which I knew would be the first truly selfish, glorious thing I had done in years. The offer letter sat on my desk like a ticking time bomb. It wasn't just the salary, though the money was a stunning validation of my professional trajectory. It was the $15,000 relocation bonus that felt like the real symbol of my freedom. That money wasn't tied to performance or an annual review. It was simply a price paid to lure my competence away from my current locale and toward Raleigh's research triangle. I accepted the offer 2 days later and set a move date for early September. Now came the unavoidable task, telling the family. I decided against a formal sit-down dinner. That would give Mom and Brooke too much opportunity to perform their particular brand of passive-aggressive martyrdom. Instead, I chose the family group chat, the Henderson home base, which was usually reserved for Mom posting inspirational quotes and Brooke sharing links to her latest questionable merchandise. It felt appropriately impersonal. I typed out the message carefully, aiming for clear, factual, and non-negotiable language. Hi, everyone. Some big news. I've accepted a senior clinical specialist role at Apex Bio in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a huge promotion and a great professional move for me. I'm relocating the first week of September. I'll be back for Christmas, of course. Wishing you all the best. Clara. I hit send. It was 7 p.m. on a Sunday. Usually, a family dinner photo or a frantic text about a sale on bulk coffee filters would flood the chat within minutes. This time, silence. Not a single notification popped up. I refreshed the app. The message was delivered. Brooke had red receipts on, and I could see the tiny red indicator beneath my text. She had seen it. Mom, who never put her phone down, had seen it. Dad was probably still outside dealing with the lawnmower. I waited 20 minutes. Nothing. No, congratulations. No, are you serious? No, oh, what about us? The lack of response was jarring, even for them. It wasn't just a snub. It was a profound illustration of my true status. My relocation, a major life event involving a cross-country move and a career leap, was met with the exact same non-reaction one might give to a junk mail flyer. They weren't ignoring me out of malice. They were ignoring me because my life, my changes, and my needs genuinely registered as irrelevant noise unless they directly impacted the domestic machinery. Finally, at 7:45 p.m., a notification came through. It was Mom. My stomach clenched. Here we go, I thought, preparing for the dramatic plea. OMG, Clara, I totally forgot about this. I need you to go to Kroger tomorrow morning first thing and pick up 3 dozen organic eggs. I'm doing a huge bulk order for a new client of Brooke's. She needs them for her Protein Bites line. I'm trusting you not to break them. That was it. No mention of Raleigh, Apex Bio, or the 6-figure salary. Just an immediate, seamless pivot back to my role as the designated runner. She hadn't even processed the news. She'd just noted that the sender of the message was the person who handles her errands. A cold, exhilarating calm washed over me. I typed back, knowing this was the true line in the sand. Mom, I am moving to North Carolina in 4 weeks. I won't be able to run errands for you anymore. You'll need to find another solution for the eggs. Good luck with Brooke's Protein Bites. And then I muted the chat for a week. The silence that followed wasn't entirely complete. A few days later, Dad called, but his message was clumsy. "So, North Carolina, huh? That's a big deal. Your mother is worried about how we'll manage things here without you. She asked if you've signed the lease on your new apartment yet, because she heard Raleigh is expensive." He wasn't asking if I was okay. He was checking the logistics of their inconvenience. I managed a calm, professional response. "It's signed, Dad. It's a done deal. I'll be fine. Tell Mom I wish her the best with the protein bites." I was polite but utterly firm. I didn't allow any room for negotiation or guilt. The relocation process became my obsession. I packed my belongings with a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. Each box sealed was a layer of emotional obligation shed. I gave 2 weeks' notice at my current role, which they reluctantly accepted, and started making the final arrangements. My family's silence was my greatest ally. It meant no dramatic intervention, no tears, and no last-minute guilt trips. They were so wrapped up in their own manufactured drama. Brooke's new product launch, Mom's social calendar, Dad's ongoing repair projects, that my actual tectonic shift went virtually unnoticed. It was a bizarre, painful gift. On the day I left, I loaded up the U-Haul, handed the keys to the moving company, and took one last look at the house in Dayton. No one came out to say goodbye. Brooke was asleep. Mom was on the phone, likely ordering more organic eggs. Dad was at work. I felt a pang of loss, yes, but it was quickly eclipsed by a soaring, buoyant feeling of self-possession. I was driving away from the script they had written for me, and I was about to start writing my own. Raleigh was waiting, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was done being the family's invisible emergency contact. The drive from Dayton to Raleigh, nearly 9 hours, felt less like a transit route and more like a ceremony. Every mile I put between myself and Ohio was a tangible measure of my independence. I played the music I wanted, I stopped when I wanted, and I didn't answer a single text message. For the first time in years, the air pressure around me felt normal. I wasn't constantly bracing for a request or an emergency. When I arrived in Raleigh, the heart of the Research Triangle, it felt like stepping onto a movie set for a much better movie. The air was warmer, the foliage was greener, and there was an energy, a pulse of innovation and growth that Dayton had long since lost. My new apartment was in North Hills, a trendy, upscale area I never would have allowed myself to consider back in Ohio, where every extra dollar was considered available capital for Brooke's next inevitable investment opportunity. I used a portion of my signing bonus to furnish it with intentionality. Bright colors, modern lines, and zero hand-me-down clutter from the family garage. This place was mine. The first few months were a blur of professional challenge and quiet personal reconstruction. My new job at Apex Bio was demanding, requiring all the competence I had developed in obscurity. But here, that competence was celebrated. My colleagues, my new boss, and the whole corporate structure saw me for my capabilities. They saw Clara, the senior clinical specialist, not Clara, the free-of-charge personal assistant. The feeling of being respected in a professional setting translated instantly to my personal life. I started saying no to things easily. I had time to go to the gym, to take a pottery class, and, most revolutionary of all, to just sit on my new balcony with a book and a glass of wine, unburdened by obligation. The family contact was minimal, just as I'd planned. The Henderson home base chat was mostly silent, broken only by an occasional, frantic-sounding, all-caps message from Mom that I generally ignored. Then came the inevitable moment of realization. It was 6 months after I moved. I was at work, immersed in a complex data analysis, when my phone vibrated with a message from Mom. I glanced at it. "Clara, I need you to come home this weekend. Brooke has a massive convention coming up, and I can't handle Leo and Finn by myself. You know how stressful her pre-launch phase is. Can you get a flight for Friday?" I read the message, and for a fleeting second, the old reflex, the frantic need to justify, explain, and apologize for my unavailability kicked in. But then I stopped. I reread the message. Come home this weekend. She had completely erased the 6 months of my new life. The move, the job, the new state, it was all a temporary blip in her mind, a minor inconvenience that was now over because she needed me. My geographical move was less real to her than Brooke's fictional pre-launch phase. I took a deep breath. This was the moment for the final, clean break, and I chose my words carefully without heat, just cool finality. Mom, I don't live in Ohio anymore. I live in Raleigh. I moved here 6 months ago. I cannot watch the kids. You'll need to find a babysitter in Dayton. The phone was silent for 10 minutes. Then came her reply, not an apology, but a furious, defensive retort. All right, the big new job. Well, that's just not helpful, Clara. I thought family came first. Brooke needs this. That was the last time I engaged in any lengthy conversation with her or Brooke. I stopped reading the group chat entirely. I realized that arguing with them was pointless because we were operating in two separate realities. Theirs where I was a convenience, and mine where I was finally an autonomous human being. The next 2 years were the most transformative of my life. My career flourished. I found a great community of friends. And then there was Ethan. I met Ethan at a networking event. He was a software developer, smart, kind, and incredibly grounded. What I loved most about him wasn't just his humor or his kindness. It was the fact that he saw me. He saw my drive. He celebrated my promotions without fanfare. And when I told him about the years of being the family doormat, he listened without judgment, respecting the distance I had established. He didn't see me as a resource to be tapped. He saw me as a partner to be cherished. We moved in together into a gorgeous high-rise condo in North Hills, and our life became a quiet, successful haven. I had peace, professional fulfillment, and a healthy relationship built on mutual respect. I had escaped the gravitational pull of Dayton, Ohio, and I was finally profoundly happy. But, as I would soon learn, true happiness is like a bright light, and sometimes the very people you run away from are the moths drawn to the flame. I was about to find out just how magnetic my new life in Raleigh could be. 2 years. 2 glorious, quiet, and productive years. That's how long it took for the scar tissue to form over the wound of my Ohio past. In Raleigh, I wasn't just doing well, I was thriving. I'd been promoted again, now managing a small but critical team within Apex Bio. My salary was now significantly higher, and my financial portfolio, guided by a savvy planner, was robust. Ethan and I settled into our condo in North Hills, a high-rise with breathtaking views of the city skyline. It was sophisticated, comfortable, and a world away from the cluttered, passive-aggressive silence of the house in Dayton. We had a routine: early morning runs on the Greenway, demanding workdays, and evenings filled with cooking, quiet conversation, and shared plans for the future. I finally understood what a healthy, reciprocal relationship felt like, where your partner doesn't require you to minimize your success or fix their failures. I kept my family involvement to the bare minimum: a Christmas card, a generic text on birthdays, and an immediate mute of any dramatic group chat thread. They had seemingly accepted my absence, absorbing the shock of losing their free labor pool and adjusting their internal economy. I imagine Mom was just delegating the tasks to Dad, and Brooke was learning, finally, to mail her own packages. I felt safe. I felt secure. I felt, perhaps foolishly, that the bridge back to Dayton had been burned. The silence was shattered not by a dramatic phone call, but by a cousin I hadn't spoken to seriously since a terrible family reunion barbecue 5 years prior. Chloe. Chloe was Mom's sister's daughter, a nice enough person, but deeply embedded in the extended family's complex social matrix, a matrix I had successfully opted out of. Chloe was visiting Raleigh for a conference and reached out, asking to grab coffee. I hesitantly agreed, figuring a brief, public meeting couldn't hurt. It was nice, actually. Chloe seemed genuinely interested in my job and my life. I gave her a quick, self-deprecating tour of my condo's common areas, the view from the balcony, the sleek, minimalist kitchen. The next morning, I woke up to an Instagram notification. Chloe had posted a picture. It wasn't a selfie of us or a picture of the city. It was a perfectly framed, sun-drenched photograph of my living room. The huge floor-to-ceiling windows, the stunning view, the plush velvet sectional, and a tiny, perfectly displayed piece of abstract art I'd splurged on. The photo was beautiful, and the caption was simple. So proud of my amazing cousin Clara. This is what true success looks like. Living your best life in North Hills, NC. Goals. A wave of dread, cold and immediate, washed over me. It was an unintentional invitation. I knew instantly that this single, glossy image, broadcast across the very social networks my family obsessively monitored, had just undone 2 years of carefully constructed invisibility. Brooke, who always claimed to be too busy for a phone call, was certainly not too busy for social media reconnaissance. Mom, who never remembered where I worked, knew exactly where I lived now, or at least what kind of life I lived. I immediately texted Chloe, "Hey, the photo is great, but could you please take it down? I prefer to keep my private life private." Chloe responded instantly, "Oh my gosh, sorry. Didn't realize it was a big deal. Why? It looks amazing. I mean, that view." I reiterated my request, and she eventually complied, but it was too late. The photo had been up for maybe 6 hours, long enough to be seen, screenshot, and circulated among the Henderson clan. I could feel the invisible thread that I had cut 2 years ago snapping taut again, vibrating with their sudden, keen interest. This wasn't just about a nice apartment. It was about the perception of effortless wealth. To them, my life looked like a finished product, a spectacular house built on the foundation they had never acknowledged. They would see the polished veneer of North Hills and assume one thing: resources. And resources in the Henderson family ecosystem were communal, especially when one of the creatives had hit a snag. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that a conversation was coming. But what I didn't anticipate was the speed, the audacity, or the sheer, breathtaking level of entitlement with which they would approach it. The damage was done the moment that photo went viral on the extended family's private Facebook page. I started receiving texts from distant aunts, not asking how I was, but asking, "Is that really your view? And what does a place like that cost?" The questions weren't born of curiosity. They were born of calculation. I could only imagine the dialogue happening back in Dayton, fueled by Brooke's latest and undoubtedly most spectacular business collapse. My pristine, spacious North Hills condo, my success, wasn't just a point of pride. It was a perceived insult. How dare Clara, the quiet one, the one who always took the back seat, live like this while Brooke, the flamboyant talent, was struggling? The real pressure began with Mom. She didn't call right away, but her texts evolved from frantic requests for errands to overly familiar, saccharine inquiries. "My sweet Clara, just checking in. So glad to hear you're doing well. Brooke said she saw a photo of your new place. It looks stunning, darling. You must be making a fortune." The shift in tone was palpable. She wasn't demanding. She was buttering me up. She was laying the foundation for a grand favor. I ignored the financially probing questions, replying only with brief, non-committal answers like, "Things are fine, Mom, and it's a great city." I later found out through a very awkward phone call with my Uncle Bob, who was surprisingly still talking to me, that Brooke's pet portrait business hadn't just slowed down, it had imploded. She had taken out a high-interest line of credit to invest in a massive stock of specialized, color-matching paper, only to discover the entire lot was mislabeled and useless. The debt wasn't small or manageable. It was a crisis. "Brooke is saying she needs $85,000 to get clear," Uncle Bob whispered over the phone, sounding genuinely distressed. "Karen is beside herself. She thinks you're the only one who can help." $85,000. That was nearly all of my liquid savings, money I had designated for down payment on a house, money I had earned by sacrificing my own life for years. And they thought, without asking, that I was simply a vault they could access. The audacity of the expectation was almost comical, but the underlying fear was not. I knew they wouldn't just ask nicely. They would employ the full range of emotional manipulation perfected over 3 decades. I started checking the no-caller ID calls I usually screened out. I felt the walls closing in again, even 600 miles away. I told Ethan everything, laying out the ugly history of my family's entitlement. "They will come for the money, Clara," he said, his arm around me. "You need to decide now where the boundary is, because they will bulldoze anything less than a concrete wall." I knew he was right. I started drafting my response in my head, the calm, firm refusal, the line I wouldn't cross. I prepared for a battle I hoped wouldn't happen. But the real shock wasn't the request, it was the arrival. It was a Friday evening. Ethan and I had just gotten home from work. I was pouring 2 glasses of wine, ready to finally relax and watch the sunset from the balcony. The doorbell rang. Expecting anyone, I asked Ethan. He frowned, checking his phone. "Nope. Delivery, maybe." I walked to the front door, looking through the peephole. My heart dropped, instantly replacing the relaxation with an adrenaline-fueled terror. Standing in the hallway, suitcases piled high, were my parents, Karen and Gary, Brooke, and my 2 nephews, Leo and Finn. They looked tired, travel-worn, and extremely entitled. It was the whole Dayton crew, 600 miles from home, packed into my hallway. My mother caught my eye through the lens, a triumphant, slightly weary look on her face. She raised a hand and waved, a gesture that said, "Surprise! We're here and we're staying." I didn't open the door. I backed away, my wine glass rattling in my hand. Ethan came up behind me. "What is it? Who is it?" I could barely whisper, the words catching in my throat. It's all of them. They flew to Raleigh, without calling. They're standing outside my door. The invasion was not just physical. It was an invasion of my peace, my boundaries, and my sanctuary. I knew instantly that this wasn't a family visit. It was an ambush, and the $85,000 was already on the table. I stood frozen, the polished oak door separating my old life from my new one. Ethan, bless his grounded soul, immediately stepped into problem-solving mode. "Okay, take a breath." "Did they text?" he whispered, looking through the peephole himself. "No, nothing. They just arrived. That's their whole dynamic. They never ask for permission. They present a situation as a fait accompli and demand you clean up the mess. The doorbell rang again, this time long and insistent, followed by a loud, cheerful shout from my mother. "Clara, we know you're there. Open up, sweetie. We flew all this way to see you." The sheer audacity was stunning. They had bypassed a simple phone call, a polite email, or even a text. They had committed to airfare and ground transport for 5 people and luggage, confident that the physical presence of the family, the sheer weight of obligation, would force my compliance. I finally opened the door, pulling it back just a crack, letting my face communicate the cold fury I was struggling to contain. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice dangerously level. "Clara, what a greeting!" Mom squeezed past me slightly, her perfume immediately overwhelming the subtle, clean scent of my apartment. "We're here to visit, a proper family visit. I told Gary we just had to see your amazing new life. Plus, Brooke needed a little mental health break from the rigors of entrepreneurship, and the boys needed a change of scenery." Brooke, looking pale and dramatically fatigued, offered a week. "Hey, Clara. Love the floors." Dad, Gary, looked the most uncomfortable. He avoided my eyes, shuffling his feet and nervously clutching a worn duffel bag. He was the only one who seemed to understand the gravity of the transgression. The kids, Leo and Finn, immediately darted past the luggage and raced toward my pristine living room, their travel energy translating into instant chaos. Ethan stepped forward, introducing himself with a steady hand. "Welcome. Clara and I weren't expecting company. Where are you planning on staying?" Mom simply waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, we're not going to bother with a hotel. What's the point when our sweet Clara has this gigantic place? We'll just crash here, right? We're family. Brooke can take the couch, and Gary and I will take the air mattress we packed. The boys can pile up in one of the spare rooms." I nearly choked. Spare rooms? I lived in a 2-bedroom condo. They assumed they could immediately commandeer my entire sanctuary. The entitlement was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket of expectation they had thrown over my new life. "Absolutely not," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the children. "This is a 2-bedroom apartment. There are no spare rooms, and you didn't ask. You need to turn around right now and go to a hotel. I can help you find one." Mom's face hardened, the faux sweetness melting into a familiar, injured expression. "Clara, don't be ridiculous. This is family. We're here now. You've changed so much. We just want to spend time with you." I looked pointedly at the mountain of luggage. "You brought 6 bags for a weekend trip. This isn't a visit, Mom. This is a siege. Now put the bags back in the hall, and let's go downstairs and call an Uber for a hotel. We can talk tomorrow." The air crackled with tension. Dad shifted uncomfortably, and Brooke looked ready to cry, which was her default negotiation strategy. But I held the line. I didn't invite them inside. I stood physically blocking the entrance to the deeper recesses of my home. Mom realized I wasn't going to break. For the first time, her tactic had failed. Her voice dropped, taking on a wounded, passive-aggressive tone. "Fine, Clara. Fine. But we've had a very long day. Can we at least grab dinner tonight? We have something really important to discuss. Something that can't wait." The word important hung in the air, heavy with unspoken debt and desperation. I knew exactly what the important thing was. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a debt collection, orchestrated under the guise of familial love. I agreed to dinner, but only because I knew the confrontation had to happen, and I wanted it out of my house. I wanted a neutral ground where, when I finally stood up for myself, I could watch them walk away, not escort them out of my own front door. The dinner reservation was a tactical necessity, a final, necessary stage for the boundary I was about to enforce. I secured a table at a nice, but non-exclusive, restaurant a few blocks away. I wanted the public atmosphere to keep the theatrics to a minimum, knowing my mother would hesitate to stage a full meltdown in front of strangers. The dinner was excruciatingly awkward. We were 5 people. Ethan wisely declined the invitation, saying he had an urgent work deadline, which was a brilliant strategic retreat. And yet the conversation revolved around one person, Brooke. Mom, Karen, immediately set the stage, weaving a tragic tale of Brooke's business struggles. "It's just so unfair, Clara," Mom declared, sipping her water dramatically. "She has so much passion, but the market is just so cruel to small artists. She had this huge order for the protein bites. She was going to get into a major organic grocery chain, but then the paper vendor pulled a fast one. It's like the universe is testing her." Brooke nodded glumly, pushing her food around her plate. "Yeah, it's really devastating. All my profits were tied up in that inventory. It's been so stressful. I haven't slept properly in weeks." I listened, perfectly still, offering only the occasional polite, "That sounds rough." I didn't take the bait to jump in with solutions or sympathy. I knew the stress was real for Brooke, but the difference between my reality and hers was that my stress led to a promotion and a 6-figure salary, while hers led to a demand for a bailout. They spent the next 30 minutes talking exclusively about the Dayton ecosystem, the gossip about an old family friend, and the latest news about a distant cousin's broken foot. They didn't ask me one single question about my job. Not one. I was managing multi-million-dollar clinical trials for a cutting-edge biotech firm, and my role at the table was simply to nod and wait for the inevitable financial cue. Finally, Dad Gary spoke up, and it was the first time he had looked me in the eye all night. His voice was soft, almost rehearsed. "Clara, your apartment is really beautiful," he said. "I mean, those windows. You must have worked so hard to get here." It was the closest I'd gotten to a genuine compliment in years, but it was immediately undercut by Mom, who jumped in. "Oh, she did, Gary. She's just so responsible. We were talking on the drive down, and Raleigh seems to be booming. That area you're in, North Hills, it's so exclusive. Property values must be insane, right? You must have a lot of equity built up already." There it was, the first blatant fishing expedition. She wasn't asking about my life. She was auditing my assets. "The market is strong here, yes," I replied, taking a measured bite of my salmon. "But I just purchased the condo a few months ago. Equity takes time, Mom." I had purchased it with Ethan, but I kept him out of the conversation entirely. They didn't need to know his resources existed too. Brooke suddenly looked up, her eyes wide and wet. "Clara, are you investing heavily in the stock market? Or maybe one of those crypto things? Because I've heard those can really pay off quickly." I couldn't help a slight, mirthless smile. "I invest conservatively, Brooke. The biggest investment I make is in my career, which gives me a steady, predictable return." Mom leaned in conspiratorially, dropping the performance entirely. "Listen, honey, this is why we came. We know you're smart and secure, and we know you're the only one who can fix this. Brooke is in a bad spot, a really bad spot." She glanced around, as if worried the waiter might overhear the catastrophe. "She took out a few loans. Things got out of hand. She's staring down $85,000 in high-interest debt, Clara. It's a total mess." The number was dropped like a grenade into the middle of the table. $85,000. It was enormous. It was irresponsible. And it was now my problem, simply because I was the one who hadn't failed. "The bank is calling, Clara," Mom pleaded, her voice cracking for genuine effect this time. "They might seize her assets. She's talking about bankruptcy. We can't let that happen. That would ruin her creative spirit." I felt a dizzying mix of anger and sorrow. This was it. The reason for the ambush, the $600 worth of plane tickets, the long drive from the airport, the forced dinner. They didn't come to see my success. They came to claim it. My home was an ATM, and they were here for an emergency withdrawal. The silence at the table stretched, broken only by the clinking of silverware from the surrounding patrons. My mother, Karen, was watching me, her eyes wet with anticipation, a clear demand swimming in their depths. "Fix this." Brooke was openly weeping now, dabbing her eyes with a napkin, a performance honed over years. Dad, Gary, was staring resolutely at the sugar packets, his guilt a heavy, visible cloak. $85,000, I repeated, the figure tasting like ash on my tongue. "Brooke, what exactly did you spend $85,000 on?" "It was the inventory. Clara, you know this." Brooke sniffled dramatically. "And the website revamp. And a huge deposit on a pop-up store in the mall that fell through. And I had to get new professional headshots. It spiraled. It was all for the business. I just need a bridge loan, Clara, just until the next big thing takes off." "There is no next big thing, Brooke. There are just more disastrous investments built on hope and high-interest credit," I stated flatly. The mask of politeness was gone. Mom immediately jumped to her defense. "Don't talk to your sister like that, Clara. She is under immense stress. She's your family. You're her only hope right now. We need you to step up." "And how exactly do you propose I step up, Mom?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms. I was calm, terrifyingly so. Mom took a shaky breath, finally laying out the plan they had devised during the long drive from Dayton. "Well, your apartment," she began, waving vaguely toward my North Hills condo, which was far from the restaurant. "It's very valuable. You could sell it, or maybe you could take out one of those home equity lines of credit. You wouldn't even have to move. We just need the cash flow. Or even simpler, you have that big savings account, right? The one with your down payment money. You could just cover the debt, and Brooke can pay you back slowly. We can draw up a contract." The audacity was so breathtaking, so utterly devoid of shame, that for a second I felt an actual chill. They weren't just asking for a loan. They were demanding I liquidate my assets, endanger my financial stability, and compromise the sanctuary I had fought so hard to build. My quiet, secure life was viewed not as my achievement, but as an untapped reserve for their perpetual failure. "You want me to sell my home," I summarized, my voice a low, hard rumble. "Or give away the entire down payment I've saved for over a decade to pay for a failed, misspelled tote bag business that you enabled, Mom, because you refused to let Brooke experience the consequences of her own choices." "It's not giving away, Clara. It's helping your sister." Mom insisted, her volume rising. "She's family. This is what family does. You have so much. Look at this life you've built. You don't need $85,000 right now. Brooke does." I looked at my father, Gary, who was still staring at the tabletop, his shoulders slumped. I saw the weakness, the cowardice of a man who had passively allowed his wife and older daughter to exploit the younger one for years. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the drama. He flinched, finally looking up. "Did you agree with this plan?" Did you think it was okay to fly 600 miles, show up uninvited, and demand I dismantle my security to fix Brooke's financial disaster? Gary just shook his head, a single, weak gesture of submission. I thought maybe we could just talk about it, Clara. Your mother seemed to think this was the only way. That was it. The utter lack of agency. He was a non-factor, a permanent fixture of my mother's domestic management team. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping against the tile floor. I stood up, towering over the table, finally reclaiming my space and my power. I have 2 answers for you, I announced, ignoring the sudden, concerned glances from nearby tables. First, I am not selling my home. I am not taking out a line of credit, and I am absolutely not giving you $85,000 of my savings. That money represents my professional success and my future. It is not an emergency fund for Brooke's hobbies. Brooke let out a choked sob. Mom glared, ready to launch her final, furious assault of guilt. And the second answer, I continued, cutting her off, is this: we are done. This is not what family does. Family shows up, they support, they acknowledge, and they respect boundaries. You only came here because you needed my money. You didn't ask about my job, my happiness, or my partner. You forgot I even lived here until a photo on social media suggested I had something you could take. I want you all to leave Raleigh immediately. I want you to go to a hotel tonight, and I want you on a flight back to Dayton tomorrow. And I want you to understand that if you ever approach me with this level of disrespect and entitlement again, the conversation will be permanently closed. I am not your source, your assistant, or your ATM. I am an independent adult, and my answer is final. No. The confrontation, years in the making, was over. I had finally said the word no, and it felt like the most powerful, most glorious word in the English language. I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them sitting there, stunned, finally forced to confront the consequence of their own invisibility campaign. Walking out of that restaurant felt like shedding a skin. It wasn't a victory, it was a surgical extraction, painful, bloody, but absolutely necessary for survival. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the fallout. I had already lived through 30 years of their drama. I walked home quickly, the Raleigh night air cool against my hot face. When I got to the condo, Ethan was waiting, his arms open, his presence a quiet, unwavering anchor. I collapsed against him and just let the years of frustration, anger, and deep-seated hurt flow out. They asked me to sell the condo, Ethan, I whispered, the absurdity of it still ringing in my ears. I know, he said simply, but they also heard you say no, didn't they? And that's the most important thing. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely light, but also wary. I checked my phone. The Henderson home base chat was, predictably, a graveyard of silence. I did, however, have 2 texts. One was from Mom. I can't believe you humiliated us like that. We are your family. You will regret this when you're older. Brooke is devastated. We found a cheap hotel. Don't expect us to reach out again. It was the classic guilt trip, weaponized and delivered. I deleted it without responding. Her final line, "Don't expect us to reach out again," was a promise, not a threat, and I welcomed it. The second text was from Dad, Gary. It was just a short string of words that made my stomach twist. "We're leaving at 3. I want to apologize, Clara. Not for the money. For everything else." The apology was too little, too late, but the distinction, not for the money, for everything else, was something new. It suggested a glimmer of self-awareness beneath the years of passivity. I texted back, "Safe trip home, Dad." And that was the end of the Raleigh ambush. The crisis passed, but the line had been drawn. I had finally articulated the rules of engagement: respect and recognition, or total separation. I had put the emotional cost of their behavior onto their own ledger, not mine. The immediate aftermath was strangely calm. Brooke and Mom maintained a furious silence. I was excluded from a few distant family video calls, and I heard through Chloe, who called to express a genuinely apologetic and supportive message, that I was being painted as the heartless, successful sister who turned her back on her struggling family. I didn't care. The peace of my North Hill sanctuary was worth the price of their disapproval. But the confrontation had stirred something deeper, something that went beyond the immediate financial crisis. It had forced Dad, Gary, out of his lifelong posture of withdrawal. He had always been the quiet bystander, the one who mumbled a quick compliment before retreating to the garage. He had been complicit not through action, but through inaction, allowing Mom's managerial entitlement to flourish unchecked. I spent the next few months living my life, focusing intensely on work and my relationship with Ethan. The silence from Dayton wasn't quiet. It was deafening, a constant reminder of the bridge I had blown up. Yet, in that void, I began to sense a faint ripple of something different coming from one direction. My father. He started sending me links, articles about clinical trial breakthroughs, news about Apex Bio, even a strange little article about Raleigh's best barbecue joints. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just engaging with my world, a tiny, clumsy attempt at connection, acknowledging my reality for the first time. I responded with equal brevity, not wanting to encourage a resurgence of the old dynamic, but not wanting to shut down this fragile, tentative outreach entirely. Then came the card. It arrived one random Tuesday, postmarked Dayton. It wasn't a birthday or holiday. It was a blank greeting card, the kind with a generic image of a sailboat, bought quickly at a drugstore. Inside, written in Dad's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting, was a letter that changed everything. It wasn't just an apology for the ambush. It was a confession. It was the first time I realized that my father wasn't just a passive bystander. He was another victim of the family dynamic, only one who had chosen submission over flight. His words opened up a whole new perspective on the silence I had endured, hinting at the human truth beneath the years of pain, and setting the stage for the healing I never knew I needed. The card felt heavy in my hands, not from its physical weight, but from the decades of unspoken truth it contained. I sat on my balcony, the Raleigh skyline glittering in the dusk, and read Gary's letter. He didn't mince words or make excuses for the Raleigh ambush. He took full, agonizing responsibility, not just for the trip, but for his years of silence. Clara, I am writing this without your mother's knowledge. I know what we did was unforgivable. It was greedy, it was entitled, and it was a terrible, desperate act. But the thing I need to apologize for most is the quiet part. The years of just standing there, fixing the cabinet, avoiding the eye contact. I watched you take on too much. I watched you be overlooked. And I did nothing. I was a coward, Clara. I was too afraid of your mother's disappointment, of her anger, to stand up and say, Karen, that's not fair to Clara. I let her convince me that because you were capable and successful, you were somehow less fragile, less deserving of recognition than Brooke. He continued, detailing his own sense of powerlessness within the dynamic, how Mom had always controlled the emotional and financial narrative, and how he had retreated into his hobbies and work to avoid conflict. He admitted that the moment he saw the look on my face in the restaurant, the moment I finally drew that line, he realized the full, terrible cost of his silence. He hadn't just hurt me. He had participated in my erasure. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, honey. I'm asking for you to know that I finally, truly see it. I see the woman you've become in Raleigh. I see your apartment, your job, your independence, and I realize I never gave you the foundation you deserved. I am sorry for not being the father you needed. I hope you can find peace. I finished the letter, my cheeks wet with tears, not tears of anger, but of profound, complicated grief. It wasn't the perfect apology, but it was the real apology. It wasn't about the money, it was about the recognition. For the first time, one of them had stepped outside the family's self-serving narrative and acknowledged my victimhood, not as an inconvenience, but as a genuine wound. I didn't reply immediately. I needed time to process the seismic shift. This wasn't the mom-fueled, obligatory sorry not sorry call. This was a man, my aging father, finally owning his decades of failure. I realized that my anger had always been primarily directed at Mom and Brooke, the active participants, but my deepest, most lingering hurt was directed at Dad, the passive enabler, because his silence had felt like the ultimate betrayal. A week later, Mom called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity and a sense of duty got the better of me. "Clara, thank goodness you answered," she cried, immediately launching into her own, highly controlled version of events. "I'm calling to apologize, sweetie. I know the trip was stressful. We were just so worried about Brooke. The debt is just huge. I know we shouldn't have sprung it on you like that." Her apology was superficial, transactional. It was an apology for the tactic, not the motive. She was apologizing for the surprise ambush, not the entitlement that fueled it. When she ended the conversation by saying, "We'll wait a few months, and maybe we can discuss a small loan then," I knew the lesson hadn't landed with her. I politely but firmly repeated my final position and hung up. But Gary's letter lingered. It represented the humanistic ending I hadn't dared to hope for. A few weeks later, I decided to test the waters, guided by the principle that forgiveness should be offered to those who genuinely seek repair, and that my father was now seeking it. I called him, just him, and we talked for an hour. It wasn't about the past, it was about the present. He asked about my team, my projects, and even Ethan. He talked about his own job, his plans for retirement, and his fears about the future. It was a conversation between two separate, respectful adults, something we had never had. You know that feeling when you're standing in a brightly lit room, but no one seems to see you? That was my entire life in Dayton, Ohio. I was Clara, a ghost wrapped in sensible work clothes, existing solely to prop up the real stars of the show. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when I became invisible. Maybe it was around the time my sister, Brooke, decided that traditional employment was beneath her and launched her third, fourth, or maybe even fifth online venture, this time selling hand-painted pet portraits on Etsy. Suddenly, my steady, demanding job as a clinical specialist was deemed boring, and the slightest blip in Brooke's chaotic business, a successful sale, a negative review, even a new idea for a marketing gimmick, became the central orbit of our family's universe. I remember coming home one Tuesday night, utterly exhausted but wired with a quiet pride. I'd just wrapped up a monumental project, a year of clinical trials consolidated and presented to the regional director. My boss, Dr. Evans, had pulled me aside and told me I was the most competent person on his team. Competent, it's not a flashy word, but to me it felt like gold. I walked into the kitchen where Mom, Karen, was scrolling through her phone, and Dad, Gary, was trying to fix a cabinet door that had been broken since 2021. "I got a formal commendation today," I said, trying to keep the excitement level at an acceptable, non-bragging pitch. "Dr. Evans called me invaluable." Mom looked up, held up her phone, and sighed dramatically. "Oh, that's nice, honey. Brooke just got a shipment of custom canvas tote bags in, and the vendor totally botched the design. They look like a third grader painted them. I have to drive across town right now to deal with this. Can you watch Leo and Finn for a few hours? And maybe organize the pantry? I can't think straight with this disaster." Just like that, my accomplishment, my invaluable status, dissolved into the air, replaced by the crisis of tacky totes. Brooke, the great entrepreneur, was upstairs taking a bath while I was instantly delegated to childcare and domestic reorganization. "My father," Gary offered a quick, mumbled, "Good job, Clara," before retreating further into the broken cabinet, physically and emotionally sealed off from the drama. That was the dynamic. Mom and Brooke in the spotlight, demanding resources, Dad retreating into silence and failed repairs, and me, Clara, the reliable, well-paid, yet utterly unseen resource they all pulled from. My life wasn't just about emotional invisibility. It was about literal, unpaid labor. It was driving an hour each way to pick up ingredients for one of Mom's overly complicated casserole recipes, because her day was just too busy. It was spending my weekends designing a simple inventory spreadsheet for Brooke's latest business failure, because according to Mom, she's just not a detail person, Clara, and you're so good at that logical stuff. It was the two nephews, Leo and Finn, who I loved fiercely but often felt more like my children than Brooke's, dropped off at 6 a.m. so Brooke could focus on her brand strategy. I was 28, financially secure, driven, and capable of managing complex, high-stakes clinical research. Yet I couldn't manage to get my own family to acknowledge my existence outside of a task list. I started keeping a mental scorecard, which was a terrible habit but necessary for survival. One year, I was awarded the company's Rising Star bonus, a 5-figure check. I mentioned it at Sunday dinner. Brooke interrupted me to complain that her printer was low on ink. Mom immediately offered to buy Brooke a new, high-end printer, citing the importance of supporting her creativity. I paid for the dinner, naturally. The breaking point wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the slow, continuous drip of disrespect. I was a high-capacity individual living a low-expectations life, and the only person setting those low expectations was my own family. I started to dream of escape, a place where Clara was the protagonist, not the supporting character who clears the plates. I began secretly researching job markets outside of Ohio, looking for places with vibrant life sciences sectors, warm weather, and most importantly, a 6-hour drive minimum from Dayton. That was when Raleigh, North Carolina, came onto my radar. It promised growth, sunshine, and a fresh start. It promised a place where my actual achievements, my senior clinical specialist title, my ability to analyze data, my capacity for independence, would be seen as the foundation of my life, not an inconvenient side hustle that distracted me from familial duties. I was done being the silent scaffolding for my sister's flimsy stage. I knew the only way to finally be seen was to completely disappear from their immediate reach. The quiet plan had begun. I applied for a handful of positions, fine-tuned my resume, and waited for the universe to give me the signal to make my great, necessary escape. When that email arrived, offering me exactly what I wanted, I felt a surge of life I hadn't felt in years, and the sweet, almost intoxicating promise of freedom. I opened up slightly. I told him how much his letter meant to me, and how his silence had always been the hardest part. He cried, and it was a real, broken sound. I realized then that while I could never let my mother or Brooke back into my immediate, financially protected sphere, the door to my father wasn't locked. It was just heavily guarded. He was older now and genuinely seeking reconciliation. And I, the successful, independent woman in Raleigh, had enough strength and security to open that door cautiously and begin the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding a relationship that I had thought was lost forever. The great escape had secured my future, but my father's honesty had offered a chance to finally, truly heal the past. The subsequent months were marked by a tense, uneven equilibrium. Brooke and Mom had retreated, the financial embarrassment serving as a temporary muzzle. I continued to receive the occasional, guilt-laden text from Mom, a veiled reference to Brooke's struggles or a lament about her own health. But I had mastered the art of non-engagement. My boundary was solid, and the silence was proof that I had enforced it successfully. The real evolution, however, was in my connection with Gary. It was a relationship built on cautious communication and, crucially, my terms. Our calls were always one-on-one, and they were always about me. He never once brought up the debt, Brooke's business, or any domestic requirement from Dayton. He was actively demonstrating that he had learned the lesson. His relationship with me was not a transactional resource. It was a connection that required investment and respect. He started small, focusing entirely on my career. "How's that new clinical trial going, Clara? Did you get that paper published you were talking about?" He even set up a Google alert for my company, Apex Bio, just so he could talk intelligently about my industry. I was stunned by the effort. It was the attention I had craved as a child, finally being offered by the one person whose approval had always felt necessary, yet unobtainable. The most poignant moment came one evening when he called me, clearly upset. "I just spent the whole day clearing out the attic," he confessed, his voice weary. "I found all your old trophies, your academic awards. They were all just tossed in a box, unorganized. Brooke's cheerleading medals were all displayed beautifully on a shelf in the living room. But yours, your National Honor Society certificate, was under a pile of holiday decorations." He paused, and I could hear him taking a shuddering breath. "I sat there for an hour, Clara. I just looked at them. All the hard work, all the sacrifices you made, and we didn't even give you a decent shelf. I put them on display this morning. Your mother hasn't noticed yet, but they're there. I just wanted you to know." This act, the simple, retroactive acknowledgement of my past achievements, was more meaningful than any financial offer. It showed me that his realization wasn't just guilt. It was genuine, profound regret over the paternal failure. He was actively trying to rewrite his history with me, not by changing the past, but by validating the Clara he had chosen to ignore. My mother, meanwhile, was completely oblivious. Her communication was purely about herself. One day, she sent me a picture of the living room, complaining about a new scratch on the hardwood floor. In the background of the photo, almost obscured by a leaning vacuum cleaner, I could see my high school debate trophy standing proudly on the mantel, next to Brooke's participation ribbons. Mom hadn't even registered its presence. She still didn't see me, but for the first time, Dad did. This focus on the elder member of the family, my father, became the unexpected centerpiece of my healing. I realized that Gary, too, had suffered from the oppressive family structure. He wasn't the villain. He was the defeated codependent, a man who had traded his principles for peace. Now, in the face of my decisive break, he had found his voice and his backbone. I found myself discussing the situation with Ethan. "I feel like I'm rebuilding a relationship with a stranger," I told him. "But it's a stranger who's doing the work." "He is," Ethan confirmed. "And he's doing it because you made yourself valuable outside of their influence. You proved you didn't need their approval, and that's what finally made him respect you." The dynamic had flipped. I was no longer seeking his love. I was offering him a chance at my respect. This cautious openness with Gary was a delicate experiment. I was letting him back into my life, not because he was family, but because he was a penitent adult who was actively trying to earn his place. I made plans for him to fly to Raleigh, alone, for a weekend visit in the coming spring. The condition, he would stay in a hotel, and the focus would be entirely on enjoying the city and my company. It was a test, a measure of whether his transformation was permanent. I was hopeful, but realistically cautious. I knew that my mother and sister were still out there, waiting for any sign of weakness, and I had no intention of ever letting down my guard. The spring visit with Gary was a quiet success. He flew in, stayed at a comfortable hotel near the airport, and we spent the weekend sightseeing, eating at the barbecue joints he had researched, and simply talking. It was the most fulfilling, pressure-free time I had ever spent with my father. He spoke openly about his retirement plans, his fears, and his hopes, and not once did he mention Brooke's debt or Mom's expectations. He saw Raleigh and he saw me. He didn't try to fix me, and I didn't try to save him. We just connected as two adults finally standing on equal ground. This reconciliation with my father became the humanistic anchor of my entire escape narrative. It proved that sometimes when you establish a clear boundary, the genuine, respectful love that was always buried beneath the dysfunction has a chance to breathe. My mother, Karen, continued her sporadic, passive-aggressive communication, but her power over me was nullified. When she called once to say, "Brooke is so upset, she wishes she had a stable job like yours," I simply replied, "She could get one, Mom. It's her choice," and immediately ended the call. Her disappointment had no hold on me anymore. The final piece of the puzzle, and perhaps the greatest gift of my independence, was the deeper partnership Ethan and I forged. Seeing me stand up to my family, seeing me process the complexity of Gary's apology, strengthened our bond immeasurably. We were a team, and our sanctuary in North Hills was protected by mutual respect and a zero-tolerance policy for toxic entitlement. What did I learn from all of this? For those of you out there in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond, dealing with your own versions of the Dayton dynamic. First, your success is not a communal asset. It's your security blanket, your freedom fund, and your shield. You owe no one a debt for your achievements, especially not those who ignored the hard work it took to earn them. The moment you achieve financial stability, you become a resource, and you must protect that resource fiercely. Second, silence is complicity, but it's not always malice. My father was weak and passive, but he wasn't evil. When I finally cut the cord, his own fear of my mother was replaced by the deeper, more profound fear of losing me entirely. This shock was what finally moved him. Sometimes you have to break the entire system to save the one salvageable relationship within it. Third, the most important boundary is geographical. If you are being taken for granted, put distance between yourself and the dysfunction. Move 600 miles away. Your new environment will not only protect your money, it will protect your mind. I am Clara. I am a senior clinical specialist. I live in North Hills, Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have a wonderful, secure life with Ethan. My family can see my life on social media, but they can't touch it. I have cautiously reconnected with my father, Gary, because he changed and showed remorse, but my guard remains up. My peace is non-negotiable. So here's my question for you, the viewer. What is the one boundary you know you need to establish right now? And what's the single hardest word you need to say to enforce it? Thank you for letting me share my story. I hope it gives you the courage to find your own Raleigh.